Today's daf is Hey. We are starting with Hey, Amud Aleph, second line on the page, Rav Yehuda. Now we're getting into 2 pages until the end of the parak, 2 pages of Agadah, which is very, very engaging, very, very interesting. Rav Yehuda Hava Yativ Kamei D'Shmuel. Now you'll remember that yesterday our last topic that we left off with was the topic of the responsibility that we have to protest against injustice and improper behavior. Even when we are not the perpetrators, we bear responsibility if we have the power to intervene and we do not intervene. So the Gemara says, Rav Yehuda Hava Yativ Kamei D'Shmuel. Once Rav Yehuda was in front of Shmuel, and remember, Rav Yehuda always says things in the name of Shmuel because Shmuel was his teacher. So Rav Yehuda was sitting and Shmuel was teaching. And a lady came and was crying in front of Shmuel. In other words, some injustice had been committed to her. She was crying out to Shmuel to help her. And he didn't pay attention to her. In other words, he didn't help her. Amar le Rav Yehuda said to Shmuel, Lo zavar le mar otem ozno mizaka dal gam hu yikra velo ya'aneh. Do you not agree with the pasuk in Mishlei that one who closes his ear to the cry of a downtrodden person, he too will call out to God and God won't answer him? So why are you not being sensitive? Amar le said to him, Shinana, sharp one. That was what he always called him. Reshach b'krirei, Reisha de reshech b'chamimeh. He said, your head is in the cold water, but the head of your head is in the hot water. So what did he mean? So he said, if you look at what Rashi says, Ani shani rabcha, this is Rashi, I, your teacher, my head is not going to be burnt. Ela mar ukva. Remember from yesterday, mar ukva was the head of the academy. That's why when they talked about pampering the sheep, they said you're treating it like mar ukva, right? Mm-hmm. Mar ukva, shehu rosh li vilach. Mar ukva, who is both of our bosses. Okay, ve'av bedin, he's the head of the bedin. He's going to get burnt with the hot water. In other words, if there's injustice, the buck stops at the top. So whoever the head of the Beit Din is, he is the one that has to take care of it. It's not my responsibility. I just work here. He said, but Mar Ukva is the one who's responsible. Ha yativ Mar Ukva av Beit Din. Because Mar Ukva is sitting, now we're back to the Gemara, Mar Ukva is sitting as the head of the Beit Din. Tichtiv Bet David ko amar Hashem dinu la boker mishpat v'atzilo gazul b'yad oshek. Because it pentetzeka ish chamati uva'arav en mechaber mipnei ro'a ma'al alehem. Because it says in Yirmiyahu, to the house of David, Hashem says, judge justice in the morning. Okay, and save the one who's being robbed from the oppressor, lest the fire burn forth from me, and it won't be extinguished because of your bad actions. In other words, who is responsible for the injustice being perpetrated in the kingdom? It's the king and his household who have the ability to make sure that things are not corrupt. If there's corruption, who do we look at? We don't look at the guy in the street, we look at the house of David. Amar le Rabbi Zera le Rabbi Simon. Rabbi Zera said to Rabbi Simon, Lochenu mar lahanidbe resh galuta. Why do you not, he asked Rabbi Simon, why do you not, what's the word? Rebuke is the word I'm looking for. Why do you not rebuke the members of the house of the Resh Galuta, the ones who are corrupt? The head of the exile, his household, his cabinet or whatever was sometimes corrupt. Amar le said to him, Lo mikavle minai. They're not going to accept my rebuke. That's why I don't bother. Amar le said to him, Afagav lo mikavle lechin umar. Even though they're not going to accept it, why don't you still rebuke them? Tam Rabbi Achab Rabbi Chanina. Because Rab Achaz, the son of Rabbi Chanina, said, Me'olam lo yatzeta midat tova mipi HaKadosh Baruch Hu v'chazar ba l'ra'a chutz midavar zeh. There was only one case in history where Hashem made a good promise and He didn't fulfill it. Where He did the bad instead of the good that He promised. Dichtiv, as it says in the pasuk, Vayomer Hashem elav. This is from Sefer Yechezkel. Hashem said to him, Avor betoch ha'ir betoch Yerushalayim v'tavit tatav al mitzchot ha'anashim ha'ne'enachim v'ha'ne'enakim al kol ha'toevot ha'na'asot betocha. When Hashem is telling the angel to go destroy all of the people of Yerushalayim, because remember, Yechezkel and the group that was with him left Israel 11 years before the destruction of the Beit HaMikdash and the final destruction of Yerushalayim. They left before Tzidkiyahu was overthrown. in the Galut Yehoyachin. This was prior to the destruction of Yerushalayim. So Yechezkel sees a prophecy, he sees a vision of angels going to destroy the Beit HaMikdash because it has not yet been destroyed when Yechezkel is exiled. And so he sees that God tells the angel, draw a tav, the letter tav, on the forehead of all the people who are saddened and are crying out because of the abominations done in the city. In other words, everyone who's a tzaddik and who is complaining about it, they don't like the corruption, they don't like the immorality. They are the ones who are railing against it, who are saddened by it. They shouldn't bear responsibility for the people who are doing evil. In other words, Hashem is saying to the angel, only destroy the bad people. Don't destroy the good people who wish that the bad people were not doing what they're doing.
And those are the ones with the tav.
So yeah,
the
tav means to save you.
It's like a
yeah, it's like putting the blood on the doorpost.
So why the tav?
The Gemara is going to explain that. Yeah, we're going to get that. So now we don't know that yet, but we're going to find out. So that's the idea. Put a tav, and it's interesting that who are the tzaddikim described as? The tzaddikim are described as the people who are saddened over the immorality that's being perpetrated. So Amar Kadosh Baruch Hu Gabriel. Kadosh Baruch Hu said to Gabriel that this connects to our story, because we're going to see that Rabbi Zerah says to Rabbi Simon, even though you won't accomplish changing their ways, you should still rebuke them. Okay? So we're taking the story here. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu said to Gabriel, Lech u'rashom al mitzchan shel tzadikim tav shel dio, shelo yishletu bahem malachei Chabbalah. You should write a tav on the foreheads of the tzadikim with ink, so that the angels of destruction don't bother them. And make sure to put a blood tav, a tav of blood, on the heads of the wicked people, so you don't miss them. In other words, the people in between, there might be some, what do we call, collateral damage in the destruction. They may or may not be caught. But the total tzaddikim, make sure that they're not caught, and the really bad people, make sure that they are caught. Okay, that's what he tells the angel. The attribute of justice said to the Holy One, blessed be He, Ribono Shel Olam, Master of the world. What's the difference between these righteous people that you're so protective over and the wicked people? Amar La, he said and Hashem says to the attribute of justice, Halalu tzadikim gimurim, v'halalu rishayim gimurim. One that I'm trying to save, these are the perfect tzaddikim. The others are the perfectly wicked. So the attribute of justice said, Master of the world. How can you call these people perfectly righteous? They had the ability to protest against the wickedness being perpetrated in their midst, and they didn't do it. Amar La, Hashem said to the attribute of justice, I know, it's revealed before me, God says, that had they protested, it wouldn't have made a difference. In other words, it wouldn't have been able to accomplish anything. So Amra Lefanav, it should say, so the attribute of justice said, Ribono Shel Olam, Master of the world, Im Lefanecha Galoi, Lahem Mi Galoi. Just because you know that they won't accomplish anything, how do they know? How do they know? They didn't try. In other words, you should try. How do you know they're not going to accept it? V'hainu dichtiv, and that's why it says later on, Zaken b'chor uvtula taf v'nashim tahargu l'mashchit v'al kol ish asher alav atav al tigashu. So he said, all of the people who are, the elderly, the young women, the babies, the ladies, they should be killed. He says, but the people who have a tav, don't approach them. But then it says, "Omi mikdashai tachelu." Begin from my mikdash. Begin from the Beit HaMikdash. Uchtiv, and it says, "Vayachelu ba'anashim hazikenim asher lefnei habayit." That where did they begin the killing? They began the killing with the elders who were in front of the Beit HaMikdash. In other words, so what happened to all that stuff about not killing the righteous people, the holy people? That got retracted. Because those righteous people didn't protest against the wickedness that was going on.
So what do you do with the...
Tanei Rav Yosef, one second. Rav Yosef says, Al tikrei mikdashai. Hashem didn't mean start with the Beit HaMikdash, the physical binyan. Ele mikudashai. Rather, my holy ones. Elu bnei adam shekimu et haTorah me'alef yad taf. In other words, the people who were totally religious, they kept the entire Torah from Aleph to Tav. Umiyad v'nei shisha anashim ba'im miderech shara elyon asher mofnet tzafona ve'ish kalim apatzo biyado, that 6 men, and these are angels, came from the upper gate that was facing north. Each one had his vessel of destruction, his instrument of destruction in his hand. One was wearing white clothing, and he had the pen of the scribe on his belt. And they came to stand by the copper altar. Was there a copper altar in the first Beit HaMikdash? There was no copper altar in the Beit HaMikdash because Shlomo HaMelech replaced the copper altar, which was too small, with a large stone altar instead. But what it meant by nechoshet, Rashi explains, is the nechoshet, the brass, was the instruments that the Levi'im would use to play music and sing. So what did he mean? Start from the Levi'im. In other words, start from the people who were in the Beit HaMikdash, who were serving God. That's the first punishment. So what do you see from here? Even though God promised, I'm going to put a tav on the heads of all the righteous people, I'm going to spare them, in the end, because they didn't do what they could to try to protest. Even though it's true the protesting wouldn't have worked. But that's not their cheshbon to make. That's not their calculation to make. That's God's calculation.
Alright, so this is not consistent with the Midrash from Ochiach Tochiach et Amitecha, which, the Midrash says about Amitecha, that it says Amitecha, not Amecha, because you should only rebuke those that you know will listen, and not rebuke people that you know from the beginning.
We'll look at Tosafot on the very top. Look at the very first Tosafot on the left here. So whenever we have easy dapim, we can always do a little bit of Tosafot like we did the other day with the 39 malachot. So look at the top. So he asked this question: When do you have to take a risk? When you're not sure. Okay, Kidamar b'samuch. Because the people in the times of the second Beit HaMikdash couldn't be sure they wouldn't have an effect. They couldn't be sure. They didn't know. But when it's for sure that they're not going to accept, so there, hanach lahem, leave them alone. Mutav shushogegin, val yiyu mizidin. Better to leave them and not rebuke them, because by rebuking them, in other words, they didn't know. If they had known for sure that there was absolutely no chance that they would be able to change their ways, it was so entrenched, and they knew that, then they wouldn't be held responsible. But because
it's better to be shogegim than they know that they're doing it amazing.
Right. In other words, if the people if you're actually causing more problems.
Ignorance is
right. So they bring a famous. There's a famous case of this that we're going to see at the end of this Masechet, and it's also brought in Masechet Betzah about the people who were not. On Yom Kippur. On Erev Yom Kippur, you're supposed to add a little bit. Tosefet Yom Kippur. You're not supposed to wait. Let's say sunset on Yom Kippur is 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock. You're not supposed to start the fast exactly at 6 o'clock. You're supposed to add Tosefet. So some of the ladies, it talks about the women, they didn't know this halacha, and they were eating right up until the sunset. So the Gemara says that leave them alone because they're not going. It's such an entrenched custom. If you tell them, then they're going to be doing it on purpose instead of by accident. Now they just don't know.
Yeah, but the question is still on that interaction that Hashem has with his attribute of din when he's din.
Right.
I shouldn't.
Right.
How does the attribute of din know?
It wins in the end.
I know it wins,
yeah.
But how does it know? What makes it authoritative to say, but they couldn't know, they weren't sure?
Well,
what makes that different from somebody now who knows? That's what I'm trying to get at.
Well, the midah, whenever we have this personification of the midah,
right?
The personification of the midat tadin is just a way to show you what was God's judgment, what was God's process of judgment.
But you can also view it the other way, because you can push it to to seeing it as like you can never know, right? Like if I said, if I go to Ahmadinejad right now and say, convert to Judaism and you're wrong and you have to do tshuva.
Maybe he will.
How do you know? Maybe he will. Right?
It's a good question. Listen,
you never know.
You know what? I would say that it's a very, very, there's a Gemara elsewhere that we may come upon that talks about this issue in more detail of who's capable of rebuking and who isn't. But I think that the problem is that on one hand, we can use this as an escape hatch and say, oh, they won't listen to me anyway, so I won't bother. It's an easy excuse not to try to correct people when you have the opportunity. On the other hand, you can take it to extreme and think that you're going to convince Osama bin Laden to become a Jew. It's not going to happen.
Right.
All right. So,
but also the concept of Tinok Nishmara, even if you tell someone what they're doing is wrong, the out from the halacha point of view,
they don't know.
They've never really educated to understand what you were saying.
So you could be creating more problems.
Some guy that's sat in
Because originally Hashem said, I'm not going to destroy the tzaddikim. I'm going to protect them. But because they didn't protest against what the bad people were doing, they end up getting held responsible.
Restaurant, you shouldn't be doing this or that, even though it's a kosher restaurant. But he has no understanding of halakha.
There are a lot more factors that go into.
Okay, this is definitely a wide discussion. All right. So in any case, the point here is that what was Rabbi what was the discussion between Rabbi Zera and Rabbi Simon was that Rabbi Zera was saying, just because you assume, don't assume that they're not going to be responsive. You should try. Don't make assumptions if you don't know. At least experiment, test the waters a little bit, see if you can make an impact, because you don't want to end up carrying the burden of the responsibility for what they do wrong. So the Gemara goes on. Uman ninhu shisha anashim. Who are these 6 angels that Yechezkel sees are going out to Yerushalayim? So Amar Rav Chisda says, Ketzef, Af, V'chema, Umashchit, Umshaber, Umchaled. These are all the 6 destructive angels. Ketzef, Af, V'chema are different words for anger. Umashchit, Mishaber, Umchaled are different words for breaking or destroying. Umay Shana Tav. Now here comes Avram's question. So why is it that God decided to write a Tav? Why not an Aleph? Why not Bet? Why Tav? So we have a few different explanations of this. Amar Rav says, Tav Tichayeh, Tav Tamut. Right? So one is Tichyeh, one is for life, you will live. Tichyeh. One is Tamut, you will die. So it can mean both. So when it's on the Tzaddikim, it says Tichyeh, you're going to live. And when it's on the Psha'im, it means Tamut, you're going to die.
That sounds arbitrary, because it could also be Takshiv, Ta'amut.
Sure.
The Tav is the one that's used to make future tense of
right, to mean you. The Tav is future tense of you. You're going to die or you're going to live. Now, another explanation, Ushmuel Amar, Shmuel says, Tama Zechut Avot. That it means the Zechut Avot, the merits of our forefathers have ended. So by putting the Tav on there, it means you can't rely on the Zechut Avot anymore, you're on your own. So for the Tzaddik, that means he's going to be saved, he has his own merit. For the Rasha, that means he has nothing. And Rabbi Yochanan says, Tachon Zechut Avot. Actually, what the Tav meant was that the Zechut Avot should protect you. In other words, that maybe the Zechut Avot could actually, the merit of the forefathers could actually come and be gracious to you, provide you with grace. For Resh Lakish says, the Tav is Sof Chotamo Shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It's the end of the seal of Hashem. How so? Because Rabbi Chanan said, Chotamo Shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu Emet. Because what is the seal of God? Emet, truth. So Tav is the last letter of truth. Now Rashi brings something which actually comes from the Geonim. You can see it on the side in Rav Nisim Gaon, where he says that I have an amazing explanation I'm going to write here. And Rashi brings it too. What is the amazing explanation? Why is Aleph Mem Tav? Why is Emet the seal of God? Because Aleph is the first letter of the Aleph Bet. Mem is the middle. Tav is the end. So he says, Ani Rishon Vani Acharon. I am the first and I'm the last, and there's nothing else. So Aleph, beginning, and Aleph, Tav, and Mem in the middle. It means Hashem is everything. He's the only reality.
They're stable.
Right, that's why Emet it doesn't fall, right?
Yeah.
Right, but this is saying, why is it the seal of HaKadosh Baruch Hu? Because Ani Rishon Vani Acharon. The first letter and the last letter and the middle letter make the seal of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So that's why Tav could be the truth, meaning coming from Emet. Rabbi Shmuel Bar Nachmani says, Eilu bnei Adam shekiyimu et haTorah kula me'alef v'ad Tav. That the Tav symbolized somebody who kept the Torah from Aleph to Tav, from beginning to end. And obviously for the Rasha, it means somebody who violated it from beginning to end. So now we're going back to this idea. You said that the merit of the patriarchs ended. We can no longer rely on the Zechut Avot anymore. So Amar Rav said, when did this happen? Mimot Hoshea ben Be'eri, from the times of the Navi Hoshea. Shnei Amar, as it says, and Hoshea lived around the same time as Yeshayahu. So we're talking about like in the time. What? He's one of the trees, the first of the Treyasar, and he lived around the same time as Yeshayahu. Treyasar doesn't follow exactly chronological order. So it's a little confusing sometimes. It does largely, but not the first few kind of overlap with each other. The ones at the end are definitely at the end. Like Haggai and Malachi and Zechariah, they were definitely again. But the beginning, they overlap a little bit. So Hoshea actually lived at the same time as Yeshayahu. So he's earlier. So I'm going to reveal her disgrace before the eyes of those who love her. And no man will save her from my hand. This is talking about the punishment that's going to come to the Jewish people. Meaning, Ish lo yatzilan miyadi means no man, no patriarch's zechut is going to save them from God's punishment. So you see that from the times of Hoshea, the zechut avot was gone.
Amplified as a prostitute.
Hoshea marries marries the prostitute. That's right. So Shmuel Amar, Shmuel says, Mimeh Hazael, from the days of Hazael, Shneimar v'Hazael melech Aram lachatzet Yisrael koyimei Yehoachaz, because it says that Hazael oppressed the Israelites all the days of Yehoachaz. Uchtiv vayachon Hashem otam vayirachamem vayivan alehem leman beritot Avraham v'Yitzchak v'Yaakov v'lo avash chitam. That it says that God was gracious to them and He had mercy over them and He turned to them for the sake of His covenant with Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, and He didn't want to destroy them. Velo hishlicham me'al panav ad ata, and He didn't throw them away until now. What does until now mean? It means only until now, but later He could throw them. In other words, that brit, that covenant with Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov is not going to save them anymore. Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi Amar Mimei Eliyahu. Actually, the Zechut Avot lasted until the days of Eliyahu. Shnei Amar Vayiba'alot mincha, because it says when the mincha was being offered. Remember the story of the showdown with the Nevi'ei Baal, with the prophets of Baal. So Eliyahu brings the offering, and the fire comes down. Vayomer Hashem Eloi Avraham Yitzchak Yisrael Hayom Yivada Ki Ata Elohim BiYisrael Vani Avdecha Ubedvarecha Asiti Et Kol Hadivarim Ha'ela. So Eliyahu says, Hashem, God of Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, today make known that you are God. So meaning only until today. Today is the last time that you're going to be able to use the Zechut Avot. We're going to see. We're going to go into this, what this really means in 1 second. Yeah. So I know that it's problematic. Rabbi Yochanan Amar Mimei Chizkiyahu. It lasted until the times of Chizkiyahu, Shneimar, as it says, Limarbeh Misra, for the increase of government, Shalom and Kitz, and no end to peace. Al Kiseh David, Val Mamlachto, on the throne of David and on his kingdom, La'achinota u'lisa'ada b'mishpar u'b'tzdaka me'ata ve'ad olam, to establish it and support it with justice and with charity from now and forever. Kinat Hashem Tzvaot Ha'asezot, the zeal of Hashem is going to make this. In other words, what is it that's going to make it? The zeal of Hashem, but not the Zechut Avot, not the merit of the patriarchs. Now we have a long Tosafot on the side that tries to deal with this problem. What does it mean that the Zechut Avot is gone?
How can it be gone?
Right. So let's take a look quickly since we have time. Ushmuel Amar Tama Zechut Avot, on the left, the Tosafot there. Omer Rabbeinu Tam. Rabbeinu Tam says, the Zechut Avot Tama. It's true that the merit of the patriarchs has expired. Aval Berit Avot Lo Tama. But the covenant of in other words, you can't say
the end is.
In other words,
still,
God is obligated, so to speak.
The end result is.
Right. There's a difference. Right. There's a difference between Zechut Avot, which means we still partake of some of the positive merits of the patriarchs. We can say we're really our father's children, so to speak, and therefore we deserve special treatment in our own right because we still have the Zechut Avot, as opposed to saying Brit Avot. God really says these people are trash, but I have an obligation. I have no choice. I signed the contract. Okay, that's Brit Avot. Okay, and that's what he says. V'zacharti. So he says dehaketiv because it says in the pasuk in the rebuke in the Torah. V'zacharti et Brit Yaakov af lachar galut. that's talking about the end of exile, and it says, I'm going to remember the covenant of Yaakov. And so in our prayers, when we say God of Abraham, God of Isaac, and God of Jacob, we're talking about the Brit Avot. We're talking about the covenant, not the Zechut Avot, not the merits of the forefathers.
One entitles us to an epidural during Chevle Mashiach, and the other one is entitles us to be saved at the end.
So to speak. Yeah, Mefarish, and he says, what does Rabbeinu Tam say?
Right?
The Shmuel Damar Mimechazael Diek Midichtiv Leman Brito Velo Leman Zechuto. And you can see this because when Shmuel quotes the pasuk to prove that the Zechut Avot ended in the times of Chazael, he says, because it says that Hashem saved them Leman Brito, for the sake of His covenant, meaning not because of Zechut, but because of the promise that He made. Okay, so that's what Rabbeinu Tam says. And however, Uleri, but according to Rabbeinu Yitzchak, who's the other one of the Balei Tosafot, not Rabbeinu Tam, De lo plege Shmuel v'Rabbi Yehuda, ela Shmuel ka'amar de l'Risha. In other words, before we had this, v'Rabbi Yochanan. Before we had Rabbi Yochanan and Shmuel arguing whether Zechut Avot ended or not, right? Shmuel said it's over. Rabbi Yochanan said no. He said there's no machloket really. All that they're saying is ela Shmuel ka'amar de l'Risha'im tamar, aval tzadikim lo tamar, u'be tzadikim ayre. Rabbi Yochanan. Okay, so what it says is, so you have a machloket basically between Rabbeinu Tam and Rabbeinu Yitzchak in the Tosafot. Rabbeinu Tam says there's no more Zechut Avot, but there is Brit Avot. Nobody says God rejected us. Okay, the Rabbeinu Yitzchak in the Tosafot says that this whole discussion about Zechut Avot is talking about for the wicked. For the righteous, there is still Zechut Avot, and that's why he says we can mention in our prayers the Zechut Avot, because for the righteous there's still Zechut Avot. So the machloket is Zechut Avot completely gone and all we have is the covenant, so we still have something, but we don't have Zechut Avot at all? Or do we have Zechut Avot, but now it no longer helps the wicked, it only helps the righteous? A way of thinking of it is you could say that back then, let's say 1,000 years ago, or 2,500, 3,000 years ago, you could say that even the wicked person still had something, from Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. They weren't as bad as, now the totally wicked Jewish person, he has no connection at all. But there was a time where even the wicked person still had, something, to some zechut, some connection, and maybe that doesn't exist anymore.
Even after they give you the Torah?
Right, meaning that zechut avot meant that there's something positive from the avot that even the most distant Jew would have.
Even after the Brit gets spelled out and you give me the Torah.
Right, there's still something. Even the wicked person has something. Right now, and Rabbeinu Tam is saying that's completely gone, and Rabbeinu Yitzchak is saying only for the tzaddikim they really have that, but for the Rishayim they don't have that.
But then the question is, we get tzaddikim gemurim or tzaddik, because somebody is generally not shomer mitzvot, but he's a tzaddik for the fact that he gave tzedakah on that day.
Who knows? Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, they're getting into details. I don't know. That's only God's judgment, I guess. All right, now we're at the bottom. Amar Rav Ami says, now we get into another subject almost equally controversial to this one. There's no death without sin, at least accidental sin. And there's no suffering without iniquity. Okay, that's another word for sin. We know that there's no sin, there's no death without sin, because it says in Yechezkel that the soul that sins will die. Ben lo yiseh ba'avon ha'av, va'av lo yiseh ba'avon ha'ben. It says that the son will not carry the sin of the father, and the father will not carry the sin of the child. Tzidkat ha'tzadik alav tiyeh, v'rishat ha'rasha alav tiyeh. The righteousness of the righteous will be on him, the wickedness of the wicked will be on him. And Yisurin Belo Avon, where do we get the idea that there's no suffering without sin? It says in Teilim, I will visit with a rod their sins, their rebellion, and with a plague their sin. Okay, so that's what Rav Ami says. Rav Ami is a person who believes, or who's teaching us the idea here, that any suffering, including death, can only be attributed. There must have been some wrongdoing. Otherwise, things would be perfect. We move to Amud Bet. He's talking about even for each individual. Okay? There is an objection. We raise an objection to this idea that the ministering angels said to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Ribono shel olam, Master of the world, mipnei ma kanasta mital Adam HaRishon. Why did you declare death upon Adam HaRishon? Amar lahem, he said to them, mitzvah kalati b'tiv ve'avar aleha, because I gave him a simple commandment and he didn't keep it. He ate the fruit. Amrulo, so the angel said to him, what about Moshe and Aharon? Why did they die then? What beef did you have with them? Amar lahem, Hashem said to them, etc. He's quoting. Hashem quoted Kohelet to the angels. In Kohelet it says, there's one occurrence, right? And the full pasuk is Hakol kasher lakol. Everything is to everybody. One occurrence happens to the tzaddik, to the rasha, latov, v'latohor, v'latameh, v'lazovech, v'lasher einenu zoveach. In other words, the bad and the good, they all get caught up in the destruction. What is God saying?
It's impossible.
In other words, you're going to die. No matter what. In other words, even though Adam HaRishon was the source, he was the beginning of it, once we're mortal, even a perfect tzaddik is mortal. That's it.
It's implied that there's no way to avoid sin.
No, it's talking about what happens to you. You could, in theory,
you die, but you're going to die because of sin.
No, this is a contradiction to that. In other words, they're saying even a perfect tzaddik would die, and Hashem is saying even a perfect tzaddik is going to die.
I thought he's saying there's no such thing as a perfect tzaddik.
No, that's not what he's saying. You could argue that, but that's another argument.
Even because there are some people who never sinned.
Right.
But still doesn't mean that
they're perfect tzaddik.
Because the fact that they never sin.
You could sleep your whole life. You never.
Right, exactly.
We're talking about sinning.
Right. It's true. This is now. This is interesting because you could say, well, what do you mean Aharon and Moshe were perfect tzaddikim? They never sinned. Of course they did. Right? They did sins. So apparently, you can still be considered a perfect tzaddik and have made some mistakes.
Right. It's impossible.
Right. But that's not what God is answering. God doesn't say, well, they hit the rock. He's saying, no. One thing happens to the righteous and the wicked. Meaning, once mortality is decreed upon human beings, that's just the way it is. No matter how good you are, you're not going to escape it. But that contradicts Rav Ami. Because Rav Ami just said that you won't die unless you've done a sin personally. And this is saying, no, you could die even if you haven't done a sin personally.
That was the argument with Iyov too.
Perhaps, yeah. Hu de Amarki Haitana. Rav Ami is following a different Tana. The Tanya, as it says in the Braita, Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar Omer, Af Moshe v'Aaron b'chait ametu, that even Moshe and Aaron died by their sin. Shneimar, Ya'an lo hemantem bi. Ha hemantem bi. Adayin lo higi azmanchem liputer min ha'olam. Because Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar said that even Moshe and Aaron, why did they die? Because of the sin with the rock. Because God said, because you didn't trust me and you hit the rock, therefore you're going to die. Meaning that if they hadn't hit the rock, they would still live. They wouldn't have had to leave. So what is Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar saying? That no, death only comes to a person who's done some sin. So that supports Rav Ami. But now we have a problem. There is another objection. There were 4 people who died only because of the reason, because of the influence of the nachash, of the snake. Meaning, the only reason they died was because they were mortal. They didn't do anything wrong. The only reason they died was because the Nachash brought death upon human beings, so to speak.
I think the Nachash got them to do a sin.
Adam HaRishon. But meaning, there are 4 people in history. There are 4 people in history that, on their own merits, would have lived forever had they been Adam HaRishon, so to speak. But only because of the story of Gan Eden they died. So who are these 4 people? Ve'elohen Binyamin ben Yaakov, ve'Amram avi Moshe. So Binyamin is one, Amram is another, V'Yishai avi David, Yishai the father of David, and then you have Kilav ben David, and the son of David, Kilav. Okay? V'chulo Gemara, and all of them we only know by tradition. Levar mi Yishai avi David, demifaresh bekra. There's only one that we know from a pasuk, that we derive it from a pasuk. The others we just know by tradition, about Binyamin, about Amram, and about Kilav, the son of David. We know that by tradition. But about Yishai we have a pasuk. What's the pasuk? Dichtiv yet Amasa sam Avshalom tachat Yoav. That it should say ala tzava. That Avshalom, when he made his rebel army, he appointed Amasa instead of Yoav as his general. Amasa ben Ish, and Amasa was the son of a man, Ushmo Yitra, named Yitra, ha-Yisraeli, Asher Baal Avigail bat Nachash, whose wife was Avigail bat Nachash, Achot Tzeruya, the sister of Tzeruya. So his mother's name was Avigail, the sister of Tzeruya, and the daughter of Nachash. Now, that means that in other words, this person being described in the pasuk, his mother is Avigail, Avigail's father is Nachash, and Avigail's sister is Tzeruya. Tzeruya is the mother of Yoav ben Tzeruya. So they're all related here. Yoav, the mother of Yoav. So in other words, Amasa, the general of Avshalom, was the cousin of Yoav. And they were also related, as we're going to say, to David. Was Avigail the mother of Amasa, the daughter of Nachash? Valo bat Yishai havai. She was actually the daughter of Yishai. How so? Dichtiv, va'ahyotehen Tzeruya va'Avigail. Actually, Yoav was the nephew of David. Okay, because the sisters were Tzeruya and Avigail. Okay, so Yishai was actually the father of Tzeruya, Avigail, and his sons. Tzeruya was the sister of David, and Yoav was his nephew. So, what do you see? So therefore, why does it say she's the daughter of Nachash instead of the daughter of Yishai? Ela bat mi shemet be'atoshel Nachash. What it means is she was the daughter of somebody who died only because of the Nachash. So he was called Nachash because that was the only reason he died. Because he was a human being, not because he did any sins. So mani. So now we have here's the problem. Now we've set up that we didn't say what the problem was yet. So we have a list of 4 people who died only because they were mortal. They didn't do any sin. So mani, who is the author of this statement? There's 2 possibilities. We had 2 sources. The first source was the source that said that people die for whatever reason. God said, people die, they die. Not necessarily because of a sin. Moshe and Aaron didn't do any sin, but they died anyway. Then you have the second Braita that said that 2 people, that Moshe and Aaron did sin.
They did sin, exactly.
Which implies that what? A person has to sin to die.
Right.
Like Rav Ami says. Yeah. So the problem is, so now, which one does this fit into? This list of 4 people. Because if we're going like the original, that anybody dies for any reason, Va'ika Moshe v'Aaron. If we're going with the Malachei Ashrei, what about Moshe and Aharon? They should be included in this list. In other words, if this list of 4 are the 4 exceptions to the rule that people die for no reason, that people can die basically, just because they're people. There's a list of 4 here. Of the 4 people who died just because they're people, then there should actually be 6. Because according to that first Midrash, Moshe and Aaron also died just because they were people.
Even though we know that they hit the rock.
That's separate.
Hashem said.
There were 2 braitot here. One braita is telling you that one was erased, or we're not counting that one for whatever reason. So the first one is just saying they died because they died. They didn't do any sin. So if this braita is following that view that Moshe and Aaron didn't do any sin, then there should be 6 people on the list, not 4, because Moshe and Aaron should also be on this list as the 4 exceptions to the rule. Right? So there should be 6 exceptions to the rule. Everybody else died because of a sin except these 6 people. And if on the other hand, if this list of 4, Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar, rather we must assume that this list of 4 follows the view of Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar, that Moshe and Aharon died because of their sin. And therefore everybody dies because of their sin. And there are just 4 exceptions to the rule. Ushma mina, yesh mita b'lochet, v'yesh yisurin b'lo avon. So then we do see that even according to Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar, a person can die without sin. Because what were we saying before? We were saying Rav Ami rejects that midrash that God said that Moshe and Aharon died for no reason. He rejects that midrash because he's saying that you can only die for a sin. Okay, he holds like Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar, but there's only one problem. Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar must be the reasoning behind this list of 4 people who died without sin.
So are they trying to reason that according to this, that you should live 10,000 years?
Well,
Whatever,
according to Rav Ami, let's just finish the reasoning first, okay? So basically there are 2 views here, but what the Gemara is trying to show is, we're trying to find an opinion that holds that nobody ever died except for a sin. Okay? So first we showed the Midrash that says that Moshe and Aaron died for no reason. So I said, no, Rav Ami rejects that. We're going to take the opinion that Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar, that even Moshe and Aaron died for a sin. But wait, we have a list of 4 people who died without sin.
Right.
So could that follow the first Midrash? No, because if it followed the first Midrash, then they would have had to include Moshe and Aaron. Must follow Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar. Right. But you said Rav Ami was following Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar because Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar accuses also Moshe and Aaron for dying for a sin. But even according to him, there are still 4 people who died without sin, because we must say that the list of 4 follows Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar. So Rav Ami now has no basis for his opinion. In other words, every Tana that we could find is going to agree that at least some people died without any sin. So therefore,
the justification of the 4, I could only follow Yeshaya and Nachash.
Right. It didn't give an explanation for the others. It just said it's a tradition. Right? So it didn't say why. So v'tiyuvta de Rav Ami, tiyuvta. So we see that this is actually rejected. This position of Rav Ami, that you don't die unless you've done a sin, and you don't suffer unless you've done a sin, is rejected. Now Tosafot points out that we didn't reject the idea. There was no disproving of the idea that you don't suffer without sin. There was only a disproving of the idea that death is natural.
That's covered in Eov. That's what's covered in Eov.
Right, that's covered in Eov. Right.
Yeah, right.
So there's only a rejection of the part of the statement that says that there's no death without sin, because you see that there, according to everybody, there are at least some exceptions where there was no sin and there was death. So that part is rejected, that there is a concept that we are natural beings, that God has decreed upon us natural mortality, and that's the way it is. And the Gilyon HaShas on the side brings Zohar that mentions some other people who died without sin. Anyway, but this is the conclusion of this piece. So Amar Rabbi Shmuel bar Nachmani, Amar Rabbi Yonatan. Rabbi Shmuel bar Nachmani said that Rabbi Yonatan said, Kola Omer Reuven Chata'in ve'la to'eh. Anybody who says that Reuven actually did the sin of committing adultery with Bilhah is making a mistake. Shneimar vayuvnei Yaakov shnei ma'asar. Because right after the description of Reuven going to lie with Bilhah, it says the sons of Yaakov were 12. Milamed shekulan shekulim ki achat, which teaches you that they were all equal to each other. Elamani mekayem vayishkav et Bilhah pileg shaviv. So why does it say that he lay with Bilhah, the concubine of his father? Milamed shebilbel matzao shel aviv u'ma'aleh alav hakatuv kilo shachav ima. It means that he disturbed the bed of his father. As we know, the famous midrash that Rashi of course quotes, and is the mainstream view, that Reuven was very upset because when his mother Leah died, instead of moving his bed into the tent of Rachel, when Rachel died, sorry about that, getting my names confused, right? That when Rachel died, instead of moving his bed into Leah's tent, which would be the mother of Reuven, which would have been appropriate, instead of honoring her, he instead moved his bed into Bilhah's tent, which was the maidservant of Rachel. So it was like he wanted to stay with Rachel, the connection to Rachel. So instead of moving to Leah, with Rachel. Right, it says that he did that. Right. Well, we'll see the reason. We'll see the reasons why they didn't want to accept that. So they said instead that he got upset and he went and he messed the bed around because he was upset that his father was insulting his mother by, first of all, always favoring Rachel, even though his mother was the first, and second of all, even after Rachel died, going to the maidservant instead of to Leah. So. Tanya, it says in the Braita, Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar Omer, Mutzal oto tzadik mioto avon. That tzaddik was saved from that sin. V'lobama says Eliado, and this action did not come to his hand. Efshar atid zar'o la'amod al har eval v'lomar arur shochevim eshet aviv v'yavo chet Eliado. Is it possible that you can imagine? Remember that in Parashat Kitavo, when it talks about how they're going to stand on the mountains Har Eval and Har Gerizim, and they're going to give the klala. One of the klalot is arura ish that curses the person that would lie with the wife of his father. Could you imagine that the descendants of Reuven are going to pronounce that curse? Rather, what does it mean that he lay with his father's concubine? It couldn't be that he actually committed that sin, because how could you do that? How could you commit that sin and then have that shevet pronounce a curse against somebody who committed that sin? Elbon imotava. What it means is he came to stand up for the honor of his mother, or for the insult of his mother. Amar imachot imi haytatzara leimi shivchat achot imi tetzara leimi. He said, it's enough that my mother's sister was already a competition for her. Now my mother's sister's maidservant is a competition for her. That's an insult. That's adding insult to injury. Amadu bilbilet matzah. Therefore he went in and he trashed her bed. Okay, to show that he was angry about that. Others say, he actually messed with two beds. That according to Rashi, in every tent, there were 4 tents, of course, for each of the wives. So in each tent, he had a bed that he would sleep on, and also a bed that was for the Shekhinah. That was to remind him of the divine presence. So he messed with both of them. That's why it says, Az chilalta Yitzu'i Allah, that you desecrated by going up on my bed. So desecration is more than just going up on my bed. It means it was also the Shekhinah's bed that he challenged the divine presence that was resting on that bed. Katanae. In reality, this whole idea that Reuven did not sin is a matter of dispute among Tanaim. So you're not alone, Sammy, if you want to take the literal pshat. There are opinions also in the rabbis like that, as we're going to see. Ketanae, as it says, Pachaz kamayim al totar. Pachaz, he rushes like water. Okay, that's what it said. That's what Yaakov said to his son when he was blessing him. It wasn't much of a blessing; it was more of a critique on his deathbed. So he said Pachaz, which means impetuousness. Rabbi Eliezer Omer Pazta. Rabbi Eliezer says it means Pachaz is a notrikon. It's an acronym for 3 things. Pei of Pachaz is Pazta. You were impetuous. Chavta, you became culpable, meaning you committed a sin. And Zalta, you lowered yourself. Okay, you debased yourself. In other words, according to this, you zilzul, that's what it means. So it means that you lowered yourself, or zol, like from zol, to be cheap. You cheapened yourself. You lowered yourself. So what does it mean? It means that you were impetuous. You committed the sin and you lowered yourself. So what is it trying to say? That he actually did it. According to this opinion, he actually did commit adultery. For Rabbi Yoshua, Rabbi Yoshua says, "Pasata al dat." What is the pay in pachaz? You trampled on the law. Chatata, you sinned. Pachaz, so pay is pasata, you stepped on the law. Okay? Chatata is cha of pachaz, you sinned. And zanita is the zayin. You acted lewdly. Okay, you did sexual impropriety. So the first 2 Tanaim here are taking it literally. That he really did do it. Rabban Gamliel says, Pilalta, you prayed. Chalta, you became sick, and zarchat filatcha, and your prayer shone. According to Rabban Gamliel, he didn't do it. He prayed to God to the point of making himself sick, and he was saved from committing the sin. So Amar Rabban Gamliel, but Rabban Gamliel said, Adayin trichin anu lemodai. We still need the modai to help us. Because even if you interpret Pachaz the way I'm interpreting it, that he prayed and he was sick from his prayer and his prayer was answered, you could say it meant he did the sin and then he prayed. So how do we know that it means he prayed and he didn't do the sin? Rabbi Elazar Modai Omer, Hafochet hateva v'dorsha. Reverse the word Pachaz and interpret it backwards. Zayin chet pei. Zizata, you shook. Hirtata, you stepped back. Parchachet mimcha, and the sin jumped away from you, flew away from you.
Like Yosef.
Right, exactly. So he almost did it, but he didn't do it. Rava Amar, V'amre la Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Abba. Rava said, and some people say it was Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Abba, Zacharta onsho shel davar, that's the zayin. You remembered the punishment that would come from this. Chalita atzmecha choli gadol, you made yourself very sick. Perashta milachto, you separated from sinning. Now before, I made a mistake, because before when it says chalta, it didn't mean sick. It meant like from Vaychal Moshe. Two different words for praying. The first one was pilalta chalta zarchat filatcha. You prayed, you supplicated. This time he's interpreting chalita atzmacha choli gadol. You made yourself sick. Okay, that's a different one. But in either case, there are different ways of interpreting the word pachaz to mean that he either did do the sin or he didn't do the sin. It's encoded in there. There's another.
But the problem with that is that the Torah would not actually identify him as having sin, regardless of what the nature of the sin. It would actually be a praise, just like with Yosef.
Oh, that he stopped himself. No, because it's saying he still did something. In other words, the question's like this: was his sin that he actually committed adultery with her, or was his sin that he wanted to do that, but instead he sublimated that and he messed up the bets?
So he did something.
So he did something, but he didn't allow himself to get to that level. So now we have another question.
Well, this whole business, how does this deal with tshuva?
Right, well he does teshuvah later for whatever he did wrong.
The whole concept of tshuva and death, I'm talking about death.
Oh, the death aspect.
And sin and tshuva.
Right.
And tshuva, then it's like the sin didn't happen.
That's true. I'm not sure if that's another issue, I guess. So in the end, it doesn't matter, because the answer is that death comes naturally. Yeah. So I'm not sure what.
No. But the thing is, that's the answer with the tshuva. I mean, I think that in Sharia tshuva, there's an answer to that. That's very nice. Is that for you the sin didn't happen, but the sin did happen.
Right.
That's true.
There's no way to erase the sin completely.
But it happened in the world. It happened in the world, right?
So it's like. You don't get the punishment for that sin.
But so was
the fact that there was a sin at all, you
still caused it.
Right.
Yeah, but still, here in this argument,
the question is, does Rav Ami mean that you never sinned, meaning that never ever, or does it mean that you sinned and you did teshuvah and then you're perfect tzaddik? In other words, that's right. There's a way to reconcile it, because you could say that it would mean that no, once you did teshuvah, maybe now it gets right. So it could be. We don't know. So Reuven b'nei Eli b'nei Shmuel David u'Shlomo v'Yoash Siman. So we have a list now of agadot that are going to get into situations where characters in the Bible, similar to the one we just touched on, it's now going to take this up. Reuven was the first. Now it's going to take this up as a tangent. Different characters in the Bible who are described as committing serious averot, and really their sin wasn't as bad as it sounds. Okay? So we're going to do the first one today. Amar Shmuel bar Nachmani. The first one is, we did Reuven already. So it mentions Reuven, but really that was from before. Okay? So Amar Rabbi Yonatan. Rabbi Shmuel bar Nachmani said that Rabbi Yonatan said, Kol ha'omer b'nei Eli chat'u, enu ele to'eh. Okay? Anybody who says that the Bnei Eli sinned are making a mistake. Now, what this means is the Bnei Eli were from the very beginning of the book of Shmuel. Very, very beginning of the book of Shmuel, Eli was the Kohen Gadol. Eli with an ayin, not Eli. Eli, and his sons were Chofni and Pinchas. And it talks about how at that time corruption was quite rampant at the Beit HaMikdash, or at that time it wasn't a Beit HaMikdash, at the Mishkan in Shiloh. And the majority of the corruption that's described is that they were running the Beit HaMikdash as a business. They would harass the visitors. They would shake them down for money. They would insist on taking more of the korban than they were supposed to. They wouldn't wait for the korban to be cooked, and they would want to take their pieces already. So they were really harassing and oppressing and making a huge chilul Hashem.
That's right after the era of Judges.
Yeah, the very beginning of the book of Shmuel, the first two parakim. Yeah. Okay. So Shmuel comes into a world or the first three parakim, comes into a world where this is the religious establishment. And basically Shmuel's job... Yeah, but that's coming next. Yeah, so Shmuel ends up reforming the Beit HaMikdash by taking over the religious leadership from the corruption of the sons of Eli that has caused a tremendous chilul Hashem. Now, it's described there, though, that a report comes to Eli, and he goes to his sons and says, he hears what they're doing with the korbanot, and asher yishkivunat hanashim, that they were lying with women who would come to the Beit HaMikdash. So we're going to see that that's the sin that the Gemara is saying they didn't really do. It's not saying that they didn't really do the thing with the korbanot. That's clearly the reason why they were punished, and God gets rid of them. but they didn't really do the thing about lying with the women. Okay? So now, we're going to see how we get this. So, as it says, Shene Emar, V'sham Shene B'nei Eli, Chofni Pinchas, Kohanim L'Shem. That there were the two sons of Eli, Chofni and Pinchas, Kohanim to Hashem. Savar L'Karav, he holds like Rav. D'Amar Rav Pinchas, D'Amar Rav. So, I'm sorry. Yeah, so he says, Eno El To'eh, that they didn't do any sins at all. Okay? So, Savar L'Karav, that he holds like Rav. D'Amar Rav, Pinchas Lo Chata. Pinchas didn't do a sin, and Makish Chofni LePinchas, and we compare Chofni to Pinchas. Ma Pinchas lo chata, af Chofni lo chata. We're going to see how we know that. In other words, we're going to prove that Pinchas didn't sin, and from that we're going to show that Chofni also didn't sin. Okay, because from the fact that it shows the Shnei Bnei Eli, Chofni and Pinchas are put together, that means they were the same. So Elamani mekayem asher yishkevun et hanashim. So what does it mean that they caused the women, they lay with the women if they didn't really do that? Mitoch sheshivat kinehen. That since what would happen was women would come who had given birth, and they were tameot, and they brought bird offerings as their offerings. Bird offerings don't offer you very much by way of eating, right? There's not much for them to eat, so why would they put them? They put them at the end of the line, because all they cared about was the meat and what they could enjoy from the meat. So they would say, I'll wait at the end of the line. And sometimes shop would close. Oh, sorry, we're closed for today. Come back tomorrow. So they would have to lie down. They would have to sleep outside the Mishkan waiting for their turn tomorrow. Like the people for Black Friday, That's what they would have to do. So that was because they held them back from going to their husbands. It was like they were interfering with their marital life. It was like they were themselves lying with the women. Gufa, we go back to the basic statement. Amar Rav, Pinchas lo chata. According to Rav, Pinchas didn't sin. Now we said that Rav Shmuel bar Nachmani, in the name of Rabbi Yonatan, is saying that neither of them sinned. And how do we know that? Because Pinchas and Chofni are compared, and just like Pinchas didn't sin, Chofni didn't sin. Where does he get that from? Because Rav says that only Pinchas didn't sin. Rav Shmuel bar Nachmani took it further and said Chofni also didn't sin.
With this explanation, we might have made a mistake as to the nature of the sin, but they did sin.
They did sin. They just mean they didn't do this sin, just this sin.
When they said
meaning the sin with the women they didn't do.
Right. For food, not for sex.
Right, exactly. So Pinchas lo chata. Shinemar v'Achiyah ben Achituv Ichavod. That it says Achiyah the son of Achituv, the son of the brother of Ichavod. Ichavod is the son of Ben Pinchas ben Eli Kohen. Ben Eli Kohen Hashem. That when it describes this Kohen, it's in Sefer Shmuel. Later it says Achiyah the son of Achituv, the brother of Ichavod, the son of Pinchas. Now why? And it calls him a Kohen of Hashem. So if he's a Kohen of Hashem and his grandfather basically is Pinchas, the bad guy. So wait a second. How could that be? So could it be that a sexual impropriety was committed by Pinchas? This is not talking about the Pinchas from the Torah, remember. This is talking about the Pinchas later. And the pasuk is describing this Kohen as the descendant of this bad guy, Pinchas. How could it be? When it talks about sexual indiscretions, it says God is going to cut off the one that does this. Er ve'oneh. He won't have an er and an oneh, which literally means he won't have anybody who is alert or who answers. Me'ahole Yaakov, from the tents of Jacob. U'magish mincha l'Shem tziva'ot. And he won't have one who offers korbanot to God. Im Yisrael, meaning if he's a Jew, lo yelo er b'chachamim v'lo oneh b'talmidim, he will not have a descendant who is an er b'chachamim, who is a teacher among the wise, v'lo oneh b'talmidim, and he won't have a descendant who is an answerer among the students. V'im kohenu, and if he's a kohen, lo yelo ben magish mincha, he won't have a descendant who offers the offerings to God. In other words, what it's saying is if you commit adultery, or if you're involved with non-Jewish women, or with zonot, it talks about if you're involved with prostitution, so that your descendants will not be chachamim, they won't be talmidei chachamim, and if you're a kohen, they won't be kohanim. So how could Pinchas have committed this sin? It must be that Pinchas didn't do it, because if Pinchas had done it, his descendant would not be a Kohen serving. It wouldn't be his descendant. Maybe his descendant. They didn't though. His descendant wouldn't be what's the word? Traced back to him. Okay, so Shema mina Pinchas lo chata. So that just shows you that Pinchas didn't sin. So according to Rav, only Pinchas was the one who was innocent. We don't have any proof about Chofni. Right? Shmuel bar Chofni, no, it was that Rav Shmuel bar Nachmani was the one who said, I'm going to take it further and say Chofni didn't sin either. Okay, Rav is only saying Pinchas didn't sin. So, but wait a second. It says that they were lying with the women. In the plural. Yishkevun ketiv, it's written without a vav. As if it's Yishkevan, as if it's the singular. He was lying with them, meaning just Chofni, not Pinchas. Ve'aketiv, but doesn't it say Al Banai, that Eli says, don't do this, my sons. Right, he's talking to both of them. Al bin. So what's the Kilo Tova Shemua? Because the answer, the report I hear about you is not good. Amar Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak Beni ketiv. If you look at the letters Bet Nun Yod, it could be read as Beni, not just Banai. We read it as Banai, my sons. It could be read as Bini. V'aketiv ma'avirim, but it says they are causing bad things to happen, plural. Amar Rav Huna B'Reider Rav Yoshua ma'aviram ketiv. There's no yud at the end, so it looks like it's ma'aviram. He is causing them to do bad things. Only Chofni, not Pinchas. V'aketiv b'nei Belial. But isn't it called? Aren't they called Bnei Belial, sons of evil, sons of wickedness? In other words, both of them, Chofni and Pinchas. Mitoch shayalod Pinchas lemachot leChofni v'lo micha ma'aleh alav hakatuv kilu chata. That since Pinchas should have rebuked Chofni, he's also considered bad for that. He didn't do it himself, but he didn't rebuke Chofni for what he did. So according to Rav, Chofni really did it. Pinchas didn't do it. But he didn't do anything to stop Chofni. According to Rav Shmuel bar Nachmani, neither of them really did it. All they did was delay the women from going home. I heard an amazing shiur from Rav Etz Shalom, who said that one of his students had a great explanation, that they were looking at the book of Shmuel, they were studying the book of Shmuel, and somebody said, how can the rabbis go against the pshat? The pshat is that they did this. How can they disregard the pshat? And the Mefarshim, like the Radak, they give different explanations of how you can fit it with the pshat. One of his students gave an answer that totally, he immediately saw was the correct answer. If you look at the psukim, it actually never says that they did it. It said that the rumor was that they were doing it. In other words, all it describes that they did was shaking people down for the money and the korbanot. But then when Eli comes to them, it says, he heard a rumor, Asher yishkivun et anashim. So it actually never says that they did it. It just says that they were talking about it. And we know that when people are talking about people, when people have a bad reputation, you start saying everything about them. Oh, I'm sure if he's doing that, he probably also did this, and he has this skeleton and this. So it actually never says it. So Rav Etz Shalom said he immediately could, when that answer came from his student, he immediately saw that's the correct answer. That's why the rabbis saw an opening here to be milamed zechut, to defend them. That's not something that the pasuk says that they did. That's just something that people were saying that they did. And when you have a bad reputation, all kinds of other rumors attach themselves to you. So we should be careful not to do bad things, because when we get a bad reputation, we bring upon ourselves not only accusations that are true, but also accusations that are not true. Have a great day.